Thank you. Buenas noches and good evening, everybody. We are so glad that you have joined us. Tonight's panel is a distinguished group of alums of color, all of whom attended independent schools and are now working within schools. And one of the things that's super important about our time together is that all of these webinars are in preparation for the NYSAIS Job Fair to promote diversity. That is, we are 3 days away. So it is Saturday, February 22nd, from 10 to 1 at Columbia Grammar and Preparatory School on the Upper West Side. And just so everyone who is listening knows, whether you are watching it live or you are listening asynchronously at your own time, I want to make sure that you realize that you can absolutely register. You can absolutely still submit or change your resume. Just send it to me directly. And you can absolutely continue to spread the word up to and including Saturday. People can register on site. I will come back to that near the end, but for now, I want to make sure that our panelists introduce themselves, tell us a little bit about who they are, where they work and for how long, what type of school are they employed in, and more importantly, for them to just connect with one another to create just a framework for the common theme of being an independent school alum, now working in one. So Stephanie, Joshua, Demetra, in that order, take it away.
Okay, thank you, Liz. Good evening, everyone. So my name is Stephanie Harris. I use she, her pronouns. I am currently Assistant Director of the High School and Co-Dean of Students at the Dalton School. We're located on the Upper East Side in Manhattan. This is my first year at Dalton, first year in the role. So I'm actually really proud of myself for getting through the title on the first try because I'm still trying to remember it. I've been working in independent schools. I want to say this might be my 9th year. So I've worked in boarding schools, I've worked in day schools, and Dalton is a K through 12 day school, and I work with the high schoolers.
Hi, good evening, everybody. I'm Joshua Noel Rivera. I'm the Assistant Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at Rye Country Day School, located in Rye, New York. This is my 2nd year in the role and my 4th year working at Rye. And I've been working in independent schools since 2019 between Washington, D.C. and New York. And Rye Country Day is a pre-K through 12 day independent school just outside the city. Thank you all.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Demetra Caldwell. I am the Lower School Director of Community Engagement at Riverdale Country School. This is my 21st year at Riverdale. For the first 18 years, I was a 3rd grade teacher, and now I'm in this role, which includes, I've been in this role for 3 years. My role includes student affinity groups, faculty affinity groups, parent affinity groups, and heritage and identity celebrations. So I'm facilitating a lot of the diversity work at the lower school. Riverdale is a pre-K to 12 school. It's located in the West Bronx. Doesn't feel like the Bronx, very much wooded areas right down by the Hudson River, where my campus is. We're at 48% students of color this year, I believe. So it's a pretty diverse group, 2 campuses. It's a nice place to be a kid.
Thanks, everybody. So much wealth of experience that you all have from a professional standpoint. I'm going to ask you to go back a little bit. And so when you go back, talk to us a little bit about the independent high school, the independent school that you attended, particularly either as a high schooler or depending on, what stands out for you. How did you end up in this school? How did your parents find out about independent schools? For some, it may be a legacy. For others, it may be where they worked or parents worked. And so the students gained access that way and understanding. For others, it was through some incredible educational access programs. There's lots of ways that people end up in our independent schools. I'm curious for you to talk about how you ended up at your school And what were some of the highlights that you experienced as an independent school student? What are some of those key exchanges or moments that you cherish? And I'm going to ask Joshua, Demetra, and Steph.
Awesome. Yeah, so I actually attended Rye Country Day where I work now, and I started here in 8th grade after going through the Prep for Prep program in New York City. So I was Prep for Prep contingent 32. I grew up in the Bronx, went to public school, and after going through the program, landed at Rye Country Day. And really, between all the things, between going from the city to the suburbs, totally different experience in that regard. But when I think back about the things I was able to do at Rye, there were just so many doors that were opened for me. I'm thinking, I have this fencing sweater on. I learned how to fence and I now coach fencing at Rye. I was able to take classes that I didn't really think I was going to be able to do, like the AP level, like history and science courses, and just being able to push myself in those classes as a student and being able to get deeper into, I'm a big humanities person, so get into the humanities a little bit more, and really figure out that that was what I was interested in. So I think that taking that and having like an interdisciplinary approach, like being able to explore the arts, I was able to join like choir, band, I was in the musical, did sports. There was just so many things that I didn't realize I was stepping into like when I was 13, but it's really cool being able to think about it now and work at the school where I was able to have those experiences, and now be able to reciprocate that for some of my students now.
Like Joshua, I also came from Prep for Prep, although very, very different years. I'm contingent 13. I wound up at Riverdale. First, I had to fight to get to Riverdale because, there were, the program wanted me to go elsewhere, but I felt Riverdale in my spirit. There was something about the outdoors. There was something about it. And so they, let me go. And while I was here, I very much, like Joshua, took advantage of all of the different opportunities that weren't available to me in my public school. And throughout all of it, like I knew I belonged. My grades were excellent. Like I knew I was smart enough. I belonged at this place. And I very much felt empowered. And so it's not like one particular experience, but it was in general, there were things I felt like, well, if there was a problem, I could fix it. Or if I, there wasn't a girls' soccer team, I said, that's fine. I'll join the boys' soccer team. And I did that. Like I didn't feel like I had restrictions placed on me. Eventually, they started a girls' soccer team. I was like, hey, the acapella group, I want to hear a different kind of music. We started an acapella group. It was things like that where I felt like Riverdale was my school. Oh, I attended Riverdale. I'm now working at Riverdale too. But I felt like Riverdale was my school. And so I acted that way. I came to campus like I had every right to ask for things and to do the things that all of the other kids were doing. So it was a really good experience for me in that regard.
So for me, I grew up outside of Boston, so I was not a prep student, but I attended school in my hometown. I attended Milton Academy. I grew up in Milton. I started out in public school, and started at Milton Academy in 9th grade. And for me, my mother had attended an independent school as an A Better Chance student. And I think that's kind of where independent schools came into, our lives. My sister had attended Milton before me. And while I love to be independent, I also love following in her footsteps. And she paved a way for me that made some things, so much easier to know how to navigate, which can be really tough when you're coming into a new space and to a school where other kids have been there since kindergarten. So coming into 9th grade right after my sister graduated was definitely a big benefit for me. I think some of the things that really stand out for my experience specifically in independent school were things like being able to choose classes and having electives starting super young. So many of my friends who had stayed in our town's public school system didn't have choices of what English classes to take, what history classes to take. And I got to start taking electives from my very first year of high school, which really had such an impact. You know, the books that I was reading were written by and about people of color. We had history lessons around kind of often forgotten, often overlooked topics. So I think that was a big part of the academic portion. And then being able to take advantage, like our other panelists are saying, of opportunities and resources that the school had. Being on financial aid, it was amazing to be able to participate in just about anything I wanted to as part of the school, and not feeling as though, oh, you know, I can't get the team swag or what have you, because I can't necessarily afford it. The school would help with those things. And so my first travel to Europe was through the chamber singers and chamber orchestra tours, and getting to go to Spain and getting to go to the Czech Republic and Hungary really opened my world. And within those trips, having your teachers and your dean of students on those trips and getting to see them in a different light and see what they're like outside of school, and the ways in which they see you outside of school as a whole person, was really special.
I love how I can just see you all reminiscing. Like, it's very clear on your face that there was definitely a connection to and a reflection of where you were at that moment in your life and where you are today. And I'm also fairly certain that there were probably some challenges along the way too. And I'm curious if you could speak to an example or a few anecdotal examples of moments where you definitely experienced some challenges, and it was the adult that was particularly helpful. And given all that you all were involved in, if you want to focus on a classroom teacher, on an administrator, on a coach, on a club advisor, on someone, you know, in the traditional role or the non-traditional role, to give us a much richer understanding of what difference that adult made in your life. Joshua, Demetra, and Stephanie.
Yeah, I always like this kind of question when I think about my time at Rye. There are always two adults in particular who stood out to me, who stand out to me still. One who was the director of diversity, equity, inclusion when I was a student, Ollie Morgan, and an English teacher, Kirk Hatcher, who really, I feel like, helped me get into the Rye sphere and helped push me a little bit. When I was like a sophomore and junior in high school, my first couple of years, the transition was tough, right? Like going from, you know, New York City public school, there were a lot of people who looked like me, and I was a lot of easy connection. And then being someone on financial aid and in the suburbs with a lot less diversity than like our school has now, right? But they were the ones who helped really push me. Like Kirk Hatcher really helped get me to start attending our Students of Color Affinity group. And even though he wasn't the one running it, he was such an important figure for a lot of us in our school. So him pushing me to be more part of that group, and for me to find those connections with the smaller community that we had within the RCDS community was really big for me. And then Ollie Morgan, so many things that he did for me, but really thinking about one of the opportunities where it fell short of not being able to take an AP course, and he really helped, actually was one of the advocates for me, and I felt like he was one of the biggest advocates for me to be able to at least take the AP test and to not be excluded from that opportunity, knowing how big of it was for AP US history. So even though I wound up wasn't able to be in the course, I was able to take the exam because he was really the one on the admin level pushing, well, why can't he take the exam if he's doing all the work? And there was so much, I'm sure, more behind the scenes I don't know about. But knowing that he was there and that Mr. Hatcher were there as advocates for me, and there's so many other people too, but to really like kind of helped reshape the second half of my career as a student at RCDS, and for that, eternally grateful for them. But yeah, there were definitely some challenging moments about, finding a way to like fit in and navigating a space without having any kind of prior knowledge that they both really helped out with.
I think for me, there was a cohort of teachers. There were three Black teachers in particular, Tiffany Reed, Ed Brockenbrow, and Imani Matthews, who I don't actually think that I had them for class, but I do believe they advised our students of color group at different points, but somehow I had relationships with each one of them. And like I said, Riverdale was a really good experience for me, but I think that they helped us sort of collectively find our voice when things went wrong. I do remember like there was a speak out board. So when there were issues that pertained to the community, we would voice them. We wrote, and I secretly think the administration must have hated this board because we were having these really deep conversations. And they were sometimes, more or less aggressive but everything was getting aired out on these boards. And they were sort of like, guiding us through how do we navigate these situations where so and so just got their college acceptance letter and they're saying, well, you got in and I didn't get in, and do you deserve it? And all of those conversations were happening, and they would sort of help us channel our energy, our voice in a really productive way. And then Tiffany Reed in particular, she was my chemistry teacher, and she is the one who said, girl, you need glasses, right? And for that, I really, really appreciate the fact that she saw me as like a whole human being, because I don't know how many teachers I had that saw me squinting at the board and not like didn't say anything. Like when you move through the world and everything's blurry, you think that that's just how everything looks. But she was the one who said, hey, I see you. I think you need some help. And then, I went and I told my mom, she said, I don't think you need glasses. I said, well, she sees me squinting, and I truly did. And I clearly still wear them. But I was just so grateful for her for that, just for like seeing me as a whole person outside of, Black student, all outside of all of that, just to say, hey, I see you and there's something you need and I can help.
A couple of things come to mind when I think about the adults that I had in my life at Milton. And, one of the things that it just popped into my head is that earlier today, I sent a text to two of those adults, Lori Dow and Pam Pleasance, who work in admission at Milton now, and Pam, who had interviewed me back when I was in 8th grade. I had a question for them regarding admission and sent them a text. And, thinking about them and about Andre Hurd, Bridget Johnson, Terry Jane Solomon, these folks who I still go to for professional advice, who were my first, second, third calls when I was applying to grad schools, while I was in grad schools, every time I applied to a new job. These were folks of color who didn't necessarily have they weren't in the classroom with me. I didn't necessarily see them every single day, but I always knew that they were there. And clearly I trusted them then, because I trust them now. But I also thought of two classroom teachers. One is Brad Moriarty, physics teacher. He spent every Friday from 3 to 3:30 with me, going over what the heck was going on in physics class. And he would check in on me during the class. He'd ask everyone, does everyone understand? And then he'd look me in the eye. Does everyone understand? And I'd be like, no, do it again, roll it over. And he just really took the time to work with me, and to make me feel confident in a class where it was definitely not my strength. And then the flip side of that, I was thinking of Miss Colson, my English teacher in 9th grade. She was my first English teacher to not give me an A. And I think that when you're a kiddo in public school who's high flying and is told, you are the best, go to that independent school, you're going to rock it, the first not A that you get can really be tough. And having a teacher who was so honest with me and so willing to work with me and to help me get to where I needed to be in the subject where I thought, I'm never going to have to study. I'm never going to have to work hard. This is easy. This is my thing. At the moment, she was not my favorite. But now I look back so fondly and so gratefully on that experience with her.
So the first thing I hope you all do at the conclusion of this and when this video is posted is that you take a moment and share the link so that the people that you mentioned are honored, because we all know how much representation matters, absolutely. And we also know that we stand on the shoulders of some incredible, incredible foundations that sometimes we can name and sometimes we can't. And so give people the flowers when, when they are available and when it happens. So thank you for doing that, because I do think that that's an important part of this experience, and the ways in which each of you have recognized some of those really powerful positive moments and some of those really challenging moments and the lessons that you learned from them. Yes, you can do X, Y, Z. You may need additional support. You may need to go over it one more time. You may need to work a little harder. And, for some teachers of color and students of color, and the beauty of that nurtured relationship, I remember a student that I had who said, you ride me harder. And I was like, no, I don't ride you harder. But to Stephanie's point, you just think that you're going to coast. And I know there's more there. And so I do appreciate each of your sharing and just being reminded of those really beautiful and tender moments that adults bring out the very best in us. And I offer that as a reflection for everyone listening, because every one of us has the capacity to bring out the very best in every single one of our students of all identities. And we can bring that out in the gestures and the comments that we say, or the moments that we just connect on a visceral level. It can be on the choices that we make in terms of the curriculum, the moments that we choose to interrupt when something unfolds. And I also want to make sure that people realize there are lots of students of color who exist in our schools across the international independent school world. Obviously, we're talking about primarily the Northeast, but across independent schools, who are students of color who are not receiving financial aid, who are not in that particular bracket. And that's a different experience that comes with a different set of challenges. And so, keeping all of that together, I want us to shift a little, and I'd be really curious if you could share, as brief as you can, what's been your professional journey, and why in particular did you decide to teach and return to an independent school? I think that's an interesting question. And in some cases, particularly Joshua and Demetra, have you worked anywhere else, or did you know that where you wanted to go was where you went to high school, sort of as that calling to give back? So with that, let's do Stephanie, Demetra, and Joshua.
Sure. So I think it really started with knowing that I had loved my experience, but also knowing that I had a lot of friends with some similar backgrounds who didn't love their experiences, and really wanting to kind of give back to a community that had put so much into me, but also help it to improve and grow and expand to be the place that I experienced for more people. And so that's something that kind of drives my work in general. I think in terms of the step-by-step process, I had lots of different ideas of what I was going to do in independent schools. And I was in the middle of grad school when I realized that what I thought I wanted to do was not what I wanted to do. And so I ended up going into admission to begin, because it was a space where I knew I was going to get to know the entire school and get a sense for what are the options? What could I do in this space? And I was fortunate enough in that job to also be running a program that I always give a shorthand of. It's an academic honors program for kids of color on financial aid. It was called the Advancing Scholars and Leaders Program, and it was working with that program and learning about student life that really got me thinking about work in student life as my main role. And so that drove me into an associate deanship, a form dean, and now as dean of students. So those were some of the things that really brought me around. And I think really thinking about you know, what I said earlier about I was in touch with my mentors and my former educators, and it was kind of leaning on them. And in some ways, you know, one of them, Dr. Seltzer, he will tell you that I did not follow his advice, but it was learning from them what I did and didn't want to be doing, and kind of letting them help me to really think about what I wanted. And I think that that was such you know, such a resource for me as I figured out what my path would look like.
When I graduated school, when I graduated college, I knew that I wanted to teach, and I actually got a head teaching job in Chester, Pennsylvania, in a charter school. And so I was never like an associate teacher or anything. Like, I was fresh out of college and went straight into the classroom. So I was in Chester for 1 year, and then I was in West Philadelphia for 2 years. And to be honest, it wasn't going well. Like, I was not the best teacher. The classroom management wasn't there. There was a lot that just wasn't in place, and I didn't think that I was actually doing those kids justice. Um, and so, you know, my husband, my now husband, we were living in Philly at the time, and we sort of had this opportunity to move back to New York. And he said, "Hey, would you want to move back to New York?" And I said, "Absolutely." And I wanted to go back to teach in a place like the kind of school that I grew up in. So I wound up going to the exact school, not just the kind, but the exact school that I grew up in. And it's because I knew that the things that were challenging me in West Philly, in Chester, weren't the same challenges that I would be facing. Like the management, like that wasn't an issue. My first day teaching at Riverdale, I had to step out of the classroom for a second because there was a kid who was like really she was having a very like anxious first day. And I remember standing outside the door and looking into the classroom because, you know, looking through the glass door, and I was watching the kids, but I was talking to her and making sure that like she was okay. And when I came back in, everyone was still working. And that was like a new experience for me. Like, I couldn't leave my students, you know, where I had been working. So I knew that those kinds of challenges weren't the kinds of challenges that I had as a student growing up. But I did have a more of an internal battle. I said, am I selling out? Am I going back to a school where I am not needed as a Black woman? Um, and I thought my reasoning was, if I'm not doing a good job by these Black students, could I be doing a better job somewhere else? And there are students at Riverdale that need to see me, a Black woman, in leadership positions. And so I was like, I can do a better job by those students, and my impact would be better, and my mental health and all of those things as well. But I figured I could actually do what I went into education to do and have positive impact on students' lives if I came back to a place like Riverdale. And that's how I wound up at Riverdale again.
The first thing that I said 2 days after I graduated from where I was, I'm never coming back. And now 4 years after working here, it's like, all right, like I'm here. Um, I did not plan on going into education, like even for most of my college experience. And by the time I was a junior, and I was working in some nonprofit education programs just to get some money. I was like, actually, I think I could do something like this. And I first started working at independent school while still in finishing up my last semester of college, as just part of the after school team, and want to have that opportunity being in DC, connecting with students and having them being able to see or work with students of color in particular. And I helped with their SOC group. Knowing that someone like me, my eighth, ninth, and most of 10th grade here, did not really want to be a part of it, but understanding the importance of it afterwards. So being in DC, again, totally like different than New York, but that was really my first exposure to independent schools. And then it was leading into the pandemic. So I was able to get a lot of things onto my resume, like being able to be a substitute teacher for folks who were out just before pandemic started and all of that. But that really was able to jumpstart, like I was able to get an understanding of how independent schools kind of worked on this side of things, as opposed to just being a student or being an alum. And what brought me back to New York was being in communication with Ollie Morgan, and knowing that I wanted to get my master's degree, and that Rye offered a teaching fellow program where they would pay for my master's program while working at the school. And was able to use both the moment of 2020 and my relationship with Ali, who really helped and who was really instrumental in getting me back to RCDS, to be the inaugural teaching fellow in the DEI office. So I was able to move back to New York, start at NYU, and also start to work at my alma mater, which was so conflicting for so many reasons starting in fall 2020. But the first day in the cohorts that we had, there were some students who were seniors who I had worked with in one of those summer programs and who were in 6th grade when I was a senior. And they were like, Josh, are you working here? I was like, it's Mr. Rivera now. But yeah. So being able to have that connection, again, with the students of color, and then being the person who is now leading that group and being able to be part of DI programming and help start to shape even further, and like, again, being able to use the moment. I know once I was in the independent school sphere, or as I was leading into my first role at RCDS, I knew that I wanted to be the advocate that Ali, Kirk, and others were for me, for students of color, specifically in a PWI. And that has always been my main driver and wanting to be that person for them. Even right now, I'm just looking around my office where a lot of students are calling the high school. And it's open to everyone, of course, but we'll spend time in here. And knowing that this evolution, we were essentially in a closet, right? As like the space where we were able to go to, but being able to have a full office space now and know that it's a beyond just a safe space. Like it's a space of comfort where everyone's able to come together and to be that person that students can go to when things are good. They're able to share highlights with me when they're having an issue with someone or things are hard. I really think that's been, or I know that's been really my main thing of working in independent schools. So and working in DEI, I'm able to get to everybody too. I work with the whole school, and it's nice being able to even shape, even like as a student, I was able to shape things. And now as a professional, being able to shape things where I teach a high school class called underrepresented groups. And it's like a sociology history course. I'm able to coach fencing. I'm able to be one of the leaders in the DEI programming across the school here. There are so many things, and it's so flexible um, that it's one of the reasons why I keep coming back, right, and want to stay at independent schools. Um, and even having a little experience at a school in Brooklyn for a year and just being able to see how these different schools function. They all kind of function the same, right? Like everyone has their unique um, things about them. But at the end of the day, me wanting to be a student advocate or an advocate for students in all ways. And I feel like, I hope that I've been able to do that over the 6 years that I've been in independent school so far.
Thank you, each of you, for just, again, trip down memory lane and really reflecting on the interest in returning. I also just want to address for anyone who's listening and for all of us who are on this call, there was always work to be done. There's work to be done in every type of school and in every facet or sector of community. And to spend the time wondering if, Demetra, you said it, you know, are you selling out because you're working in independent schools? I think early on in my own career, I thought about, I'm a Head Start kid. I've worked in public schools. Charter schools were not as big as they are today as another educational choice. So it was really for me between public and independent schools. Parochial schools were also not very big, and sadly, as they continue to close, we know that they are, you know, suffering as well. And I just remember stopping one day and just thinking, you know, you could spend time thinking about all the places and roles that you might have in all the different kinds of schools. And that's a lot of time that may not be best spent. And so wherever you are, do your very best and accept that that's where you're meant to be at the moment. And when time's up and it's time to move on to something else, when your calling is drawing you elsewhere, wherever that is, just keep it moving. And 30 plus years later in independent schools, there's something to be said for reconciling that wondering. And I say that as the Head Start kid, who then went on to serve as a trustee of the Head Start program that I graduated from. And what power that was, from this beautiful place of the person who signed my diploma, who was the founding executive director, I was then able to serve as a trustee of and chair of the search committee to find her replacement. And like, what a full circle moment that was for me. So anyway, my point is we all have work to do, and there's always work to be done everywhere. So we do what we can with what we have when we can, and then we keep it moving. I'm curious if you could speak to, maybe just one example of what do you enjoy most about your role? So remind us what your role is, and then what do you find most challenging? So what do you enjoy most, one thing? What do you find most challenging in your particular roles? Demetra, Stephanie, and Joshua.
All right, I am the lower school director of community engagement. So like I said, I facilitate a lot of the lower school diversity work. I think one of the things that I like the most is when we get to do our heritage and identity celebrations, like the feedback that I get from families, from students around like how important it is for them to be seen. Like we recently spotlighted Pakistan, and the family wrote back to me and said, we've never had an opportunity to do anything like that in our schools. Thank you so much. Like that sort of thing. It happened around Kwanzaa. It happened around our Jewish celebrations. They said, what a joyful Jewish celebration that was. And everything that's going on in the world, I'm so glad that we had like a moment of joy. The Kwanzaa celebration, they said, it's so amazing to see how the community is coming together, how students are getting to form relationships with their friends' parents. So I have so many of those like moments where I see, yeah, all right, the work that I'm doing is really meaningful, like in the moment, for people to know that they are seen and valued within our community. And so I think that's probably the best part. And then I also have like weekly meetings with our students of color group, which is just why work in like elementary schools if you don't want to be around kids. Like they are just the best, and so they bring me a lot of joy. I think the most challenging thing, honestly, for me, it's the politics of everything. I find that the higher you go, the more politics are involved. So when I was a classroom teacher, it was very easy for me to know what the right thing to do was. It was like, my job is to keep my students safe. My job is to make sure that they're learning, right? And so as long as I was doing those two things, I was doing a good job. But the higher up you go, you realize, oh, there are more constituencies. There are conflicting needs, the parents, some parents want one thing and other parents want a different thing, and the board needs to pay for it all, and we need to make sure that we're in compliance and things are safe. And how you figure that out, and whose feelings are going to be heard, or who, what's the chain of command, all of those sorts of things get really complicated really quickly. And so for me, someone who was in the classroom, counting my Phil and my Pennsylvania experience, I was in the classroom for 21 years. Coming into this role, being this like sort of middle leadership, it's hard. It's definitely like a curve where I'm learning and I'm growing. Still sort of coming at things, sort of feeling empowered, hey, like, let me ask the question, let me bring up this thing that I think is an issue. And I'll have I'll have my administrators tell me, oh, well, this is why, not this. This is why we can't do it that way. So I'm learning, but it's tough, it's tricky. And it's also, I just want to point out too, that I learned last year that I am not alone in all of this, that there are people like Liz, there are people at other schools, there are people, my Prep for Prep alumni, my, Riverdale alumni, who are in schools like this, who are in positions like this, who are also a support network. And I'm learning, to lean on them in ways that I didn't need to lean on them when I was a classroom teacher. So all of those things have been really, really helpful.
I would say my favorite is getting to see the students in the environments that they love. And so sometimes that's visiting a class. I love visiting a class where there's an activity going on, but other times it's seeing a performance or a game, and you see how much it matters to them that you show up to those things. I had My previous school, I was at Fieldston, and we didn't have our own tennis courts. I had an advisee who had been on the tennis team for 4 years, and it was tough to go see her in a game, but I finally got to go senior year. And she came running up to me and she said, "Miss Harris, you're here. Like, let me show you." And she was showing me who was doing what. And she was very excited about it. Or, chaperoning the Model Congress trip, or next weekend, somehow I've agreed to chaperone the girls of color overnight at school. I might regret it later, but right now I'm excited for it. And, just having those moments of getting to see the students in their element, and letting them see how much you care about them and what they care about, is definitely a big favorite for me. I would say one of the biggest challenges is, I think as educators, and for myself with a background in social work, health and wellness is so much a part of what we want, for our students. And our society loves to reward perfection, loves to reward achievement, and sometimes it can be difficult for students and families to see where health and wellness can converge with those goals. And there can be a lot of pressure that students create for themselves, pressure from their parents, pressure from friends, pressure from television, who knows where. Although I guess they don't watch TV so much, YouTube, Snapchat. And I think that it can be really, really hard when you're thinking about, I love that you want to challenge yourself. I love that you hold yourself to a high standard, and you are a person and a human first, and you need to stay home because you're sick. You need to ask for that extension. You need to be okay with the B on your transcript. And that can be a really hard thing to feel as though you're kind of screaming into a void of a society that is reinforcing um, some different habits. But I think what's great is you have, my experience has been that my colleagues are with me in the hope and the drive for healthy children. And so, for me, it's about really collaborating with my colleagues and figuring out, okay, this one kiddo, I don't know how to help them kind of break through that perfectionism, and working with my colleagues to try to get them there.
Yeah, I think what I enjoy the most about my role is how many people I get to interact with each day. I have so much connection with my students. Like I said, high schoolers are in my office all day. And but even between the high schoolers, working with our lower school students of color affinity group, and just seeing them walk across campus, but know that they're saying hi to me, and I'm like, oh, that's so great. And being able to connect with all the students. Across the grade levels, which is why I really wanted to get into independent schools, like I was saying before. But also being able to connect with every division, folks that work in each division, and with parents. So between my role, like DEI, one of those things is financial aid. So being that point person for families who are receiving financial aid, um, and going over with them the things that are available to them, because we have this holistic approach, right? We want to make sure that everybody is able to participate in all areas of the school, and just being able to connect with families on that and have that moment of being very open with them that as someone who received financial aid when I was a student, this was my experience, and this is what I would love for your student to experience as well. I think really being able to, again, just connect with so many people. I guess in the same breath, that can also be the most challenging because it is like 1,000 people, um, working with and being able to juggle all of that. But I'd say the challenging part comes in sometimes just a challenge for like finding time, being able, there are so many things to balance, and the work will get done, and um, it's necessary to be done, but really sometimes there's just not enough time in the day. And kind of like what Stephanie was saying, like finding that perfection, and like it just can't happen. Like I also need to make sure that I'm watching for myself, right? I think that's where sometimes the challenge um can come in. So knowing that it's good and necessary work, and then the challenge can be sometimes that balance, right? And knowing how much is getting done, needs to be done, and will be done.
The challenge of the most important resource we have that is not renewable, time. It is amazing. And with email being what it is today, and the added layer of people not filtering when they respond, or they shoot off a message when really you want to get your feelings out, then just let it live in the draft folder for an overnight. You know, the reactivity that I think email has created, and for teachers and for people who work in schools, is really extraordinary, and we don't have enough time. So I appreciate, once again, the three of you giving so generously of your time this evening, and everyone who has been on our panels. An hour is a great deal of time, and I recognize it. So I want to, with our last question, I want to give you an opportunity to speak to the prospective candidates who are listening now, who will listen either right before the event on Saturday or after, as they're preparing and they want some insight. What do you think is important for prospective candidates to know about working with students in our schools? And what advice would you give them? And I'm going to challenge you to think about this advice for people who have never worked, who have never attended independent schools, and for those who have, that are alums just like you. So, you know, depending on which way you want to go, what is important for people to know, for prospective candidates to know about working with school students in our schools, and what advice would you give if they're alums, how to leverage that piece, particularly at the job fair, and you've got that 3 to 5 minute intro elevator speech moment, and then during the process. So take a moment. And whoever wants to go first, no order, just whoever feels compelled to share.
I'll jump in. I think we should not undervalue our own worth and our experiences. Know that you bring a lot to the table. We all have diverse backgrounds, we all have different experiences, different perspectives, and all of that is so rich and so important. And I think sometimes people come to these schools and they want to fit in. And yeah, we want to fit in to a certain extent, but I think bringing what you have to the table and making the school what it is by being a unique part of that school. Like, we're a community because all the people in the community come together and they bring themselves to it, and that shapes the community. If it was a different group of individuals, it would be a different community. And so, like, I think understanding who you are, that all of your students and their families, they all bring something unique, and trying to celebrate that and not hide that or say, oh, well, I can't be that person here. I think all of our communities are better when we are that person there, when we don't feel like we have to hide or partition. And also, to that extent, like being a teacher, not even so much dealing with like the student side of it, but being a teacher when you're in these roles, I would say, don't be afraid to go beyond being a person of color in these institutions, right? When you have the opportunity to do professional development, don't just go to the ones that are for people of color. Don't just don't pigeonhole yourself. So I would go to everything. I've learned how to do lots of math things. I've learned how to do different reading things. I've gone to so many different kinds of professional development so that I'm marketable. I can take my skills anywhere. I'm building myself up in the process of, yes, I'm helping my school, I'm learning how to deliver curriculum, but I'm not just going to say, well, I'm a Black person at this school, so I need to stay within the Black bubble. I'm going to go and I'm going to learn and build myself up as much as I possibly can, so that so that I'm whole, but two, so that I can go out at any point and go after the job or the thing that I want. And then the last thing I'll say is to definitely keep track of your victories, because there are going to be some really hard days where you're like, why am I doing this? What is it all for? And that's when you need to like go into your back pocket, whether it's that like file folder that you printed out, the email that praised you, or whatever it is. Keep track of them somehow, because it's on those hard days where you need to go back and say, And it's because the work is meaningful and it meant something to this kid, and it was really, really important for them and for me. So those are my words of advice.
I'll jump in because something you were saying, Demetra, kind of sparked something in me. So you were talking about kind of being your whole self in these spaces. And I really want candidates to know that students are going to want to know you, right? You're going to want to know them and they're going to want to know you. And I was thinking about just this afternoon, it'd been a long day. I was very much ready to leave. I was kind of getting ready, and a student just popped into my office. And he is a student who we've had little conversations in the hallway. I saw him bobbing his head to some music one day. I asked him what he was listening to. We haven't had a ton of talk, but he came in, he sat down, his hair is locked, and he was asking me questions about, what do you think about, I'm trying to get the hair out of my eyes, and should I do this and should I do that? And I was talking about, yeah, I know when you've got thick hair, I use headbands instead of scrunchies because scrunchies aren't big enough. Maybe try a headband, right? And we talked about how, I had spoken to another student about maybe we need to have some conversations next year as part of some of the programming that we have through our Equity and Belonging office around Black hair, and we can come together and think about what advice do we have for each other. And in that conversation, he was learning about me and my transition from relaxed hair to natural hair and all these things. And that was something that he really seemed to get a kick out of, right? So the students are going to want to know you. And then I would say in terms of, going through that candidate process, I definitely, I've said it before, but really tapping into adults, if you are an alum of an independent school, tapping into your adults, getting their thoughts, having them explain to you, yeah, this is what that title might mean. Or, when you're reading this job description, read between the lines here, right? Those are folks who and who you can trust, right? To tell you the real deal. And sometimes those people are also the people who are going to go to bat for you. Heather Flewelling was someone at a different conference a few years back who introduced me to someone that got me a job, my second job in independent schools, right? And she had been my DEI director when I was in high school. So those are the folks who can really be in your corner and help you practice that elevator pitch, help you practice, I want to negotiate a salary, but I don't know what's reasonable to ask for. And those are people who love you and have wanted to see you grow since you were young. And so they're going to want to continue seeing that in you. So I definitely recommend that to any other alumni out there.
Yeah, I think the thing that really jumps out to me is the idea of just being authentically yourself. I think through the process and then when you're at the schools, um, I think that was the thing for me when I started. It was partly being like fresh out of college, wanting to be a little bit more like, a little more up. But I do enjoy wearing ties, right? Like, and just kind of being that person. And then after getting around from that, the kids are like, oh, okay, you wear a tie, but like, you kind of talk like me, and kind of being able to have those connections both with students and with colleagues, right? Like being able to find the different communities within RCS has been big for me so that I know I can go to somebody when I'm dealing with something with a student or have a question, and kind of having those um or getting to those revelations, I think, and seeing how the students have appreciated not just myself, but some other colleagues who I can just thinking of immediately who are authentically themselves. Uh, it can be hard. I won't say it's easy because knowing that we are in like these PWIs, right? But knowing that then I can go home and say I wasn't putting on a facade, and being able to I don't have to wrestle with that, knowing that I was me the whole time, I think has really been big. Just thinking about like working at independent schools and being able to connect with, again, kids and colleagues.
Thank you all for your thoughtful responses, for the advice you just offered. I would like to add, there are many different ways to live and thrive in our schools. And it's not a linear experience. There are going to be some highs and some lows. And knowing that that's just going to happen naturally as a student and as a professional in the schools, and to just recognize that that is reality. It's not all going to be a bed of roses. There are going to be some thorns along the way. And I think it's important to also recognize when those thorns happen and you want to talk about it. And really one of the ways that we can strive to a level of resolution and healing is if we can be heard and being able to articulate whatever error or wrongdoing we feel has unfolded. Just make sure that when you want to go down that road, that someone is in the mindset to really listen to what you're saying, and that you are delivering the message in the way that it can be heard. And that's not to say that you don't have any bass in your voice, or you can't say, this is why I'm so angry. Just really thinking, how can I deliver a message so that it can be heard, so that the impact that it has is it doesn't happen again, and that that person truly understands the impact that it had. And then so many of our schools talk about restorative justice or restorative practices, integrating some sort of, how do you restore the relationship? How do you restore the connection? How do you avoid from that moment just defining the rest of your day or the rest of your time? I also think is important, because there are going to be good days and there are going to be some challenging ones. With that, I'm going to transition because we are nearing the end, and I just want to remind everyone the pre-registration for the process. The pre-registration process for the job fair is really, really simple. It will probably take you 2 to 3 minutes. Make sure that resume looks really solid, presents you in the best possible light. Best piece of advice I can ever offer is make sure somebody looks at your materials once, twice, maybe 3 times, catches whatever mistakes, typos, spacing issues, just anything that's going to not present you in the best possible light. Because for those of us that are reviewing resumes, we are reviewing resumes very fast. And if anything clearly is throwing us off, that's something we notice, and it's not a good notice. It's a next kind of notice often. That's one thing. Those cover letters, really think about those cover letters. If you are an independent school alum, mention that. Mention the importance of the impact that an adult had in your life in 2 or 3 sentences. It doesn't have to be a whole paragraph. But leverage that insight, because that does distinguish you as a candidate from someone who may not have that experience. And finally, with the event happening this Saturday, if you have not pre-registered, please do so. Yes, you can register on site. Please arrive between 9:15 and 9:30, no later than 9:30. I do a very quick overview of what to expect. You should be prepared to answer some very basic questions. Tell me what interests you about the position that you were approaching our table about. Tell us what interests you about our school. So know a little something about the school. And your ability to be able to speak to why you are passionate about working with young people in 2025 is critical. And it doesn't matter what age they are. If you're passionate about working with young people, to be able to say that succinctly is going to be an area of strength for you to really distinguish yourself in the short amount of time that you have at the event. And then, of course, follow up. Say thank you and follow up. Those are some key components. If you have uploaded a resume and you want to make a change or two, you have very little time left. Easiest thing for you to do is just to send it to me and I can upload it for you. It'll take me 1 minute at most. It might take you much longer. I'm used to doing it for candidates. And I'm also used to really supporting candidates, not just for the job fair, certainly after the job fair, when you really are starting those interviews and connecting with schools and starting to really think about the possibilities. So I am definitely here for you. And I hope that you will email jobfair@nysais.org. I'm the one that's going to be answering, I promise. And with that, I'm going to pause. And just once again, thank Demetra, Stephanie, and Joshua for your time, for the dedication that you have shown so many students and colleagues through the years, and for your willingness to share your perspectives today with all of us and those that are listening beyond our time together this evening. So thank you, best of luck. And we look forward to seeing everyone Saturday, February 22nd and beyond. Have a good evening, everyone. Thank you, Wakia, behind the scenes. Thank you, everybody who joined us live.